Good morning. My name is Barb Vale. The title of my lesson is Collaborative Strategic Reading, and this is for a third grade reading level. All right, good morning, class. All right, today we are going to learn another strategy that we can use to help us with our comprehension or understanding what we're reading. So this strategy is called Collaborative Strategic Reading, or CSR for short. So to break this great big title down, let's look at each of the words and phrases in it. Okay, so the first one, collaborative. Collaborative means working together, such as what you do when you work with your reading or math partners. You guys are working together to figure it out. And then strategic reading. Strategic reading is simply a plan or a strategy to help us understand and remember what we have read. So this is a strategy that we are going to use when we're working with others to help us understand and remember what we have read. So I would like you all to look at the strategy chart up here on the whiteboard. As you can see, this strategy that we're going to be learning how to use has four main parts. First one is preview. Second one is click and clunk. The third one is, where am I at here? Get the gist. And the last one is wrap up. Okay, so preview is what we're going to use before we read, and then wrap up is used after we read. So the two in the middle, click and clunk and get the gist, those are used as many times as we need during the reading. So as we're reading, we're going to keep using those same two parts of our strategy. Okay, so here I'm going to pass everyone out a copy of the passage we're going to be reading today. It is called Pioneers on the Oregon Trail. We're going to read the first two sections as I model how to use this strategy. Okay, so we're going to use just the first two sections as we see how to use this new CSR strategy. All right, so the first step in our strategy is what again? To preview. Good readers always preview a section before reading it. So the parts of preview, they include scanning the text, brainstorming what you already know about the topic, and predicting what you're going to learn. So as you can see up here, we have scanning, brainstorming, and predicting. So the first step in preview is to scan. The selection we're reading today, Pioneers on the Oregon Trail, is informational text. Informational text usually has graphic features such as titles, headings, maps, illustrations, sidebars, and other features that are going to provide us more information than just the text itself. So when we're previewing the section, we're going to be looking for these types of features first. So I'm going to begin my preview. I just want you to watch. I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, what I'm doing as I do my preview. Okay? So I see the title, Pioneers of the Oregon Trail, here at the top of the page. This is a topic that our selection is about. I also see two bold-faced headings a little bit further down, The Way West and Packing for the Journey. And then over on the left, I see a sidebar. It's kind of like another little section of our paper. And over on the sidebar, that text is italicized. See how it kind of is slanted a little bit? That which is a quote. So in this case, we can see that it's a quote by Helen Stewart. And below the quote, I see a picture of a covered wagon. And then along the bottom of my page, I see a timeline of events. Okay, so we've completed our scan. We've looked over our text, identified some important features, and the next step in preview is to brainstorm. Brainstorm what we already know. So we are going to write this here to help us remember things that we already know about the topic. So right here up on my board, I'm going to write some of our brainstorm ideas. I know from watching movies and reading books that pioneers traveled in covered wagons, and that they left the east and traveled west in these wagons. Those are two things that I already know kind of about the pioneer time. Okay, and so the final step in preview is to predict what the passage is going to be about, to predict what we are going to learn. So after we've brainstormed what we know about the topic, then we are going to predict what we're going to learn from reading the passage. And our predictions, they're based on clues in the text and what we already know about the topic. So when making your predictions, you're going to tell what makes you think so. Make sense? Okay, so for example, in this text, based on our title, Pioneers on the Oregon Trail, based on the headings that we saw, The Way West and Packing for the Journey, and the pictures of the covered wagon, I predict that I will learn about how the pioneers traveled to Oregon in covered wagons. And based on the quote in the sidebar, that little quote by Helen over there, I predict that I will learn what the journey was like for the settlers. And then based on the second heading, packing for the journey, I predict that I will learn the type of things the settlers packed for their journey. Okay, so we have our predictions written right up here. We're going to be able to refer back to those later, okay? But we're going to leave them there for now. Those are our predictions. We're going to see later if our predictions came true. Okay, so the next step in our CSR strategy is called click and clunk. So this is really just another name for using what we have already learned to monitor our comprehension while we read by noticing what we do understand and what we don't understand. So, words or concepts whose meanings we understand, they click, kind of like a train rolling down the track. We just click, click, click along. They make sense. We know what we're reading. Words or concepts whose meanings we don't understand, those clunk, kind of like if our train ran into an obstacle. So when we hit one of these clunks, we can use one of our fix-up strategies that we learned before, such as the vocabulary strategy, to help us figure it out. Do you remember how the vocabulary strategy is a strategy for figuring out the meaning of an unfamiliar word? And we use context and word part clues together to help us figure out the word. So I'm going to use the steps now in the vocabulary strategy to help me figure out a word clunk that I ran into in this passage. So I'm going to read the first paragraph of The Way West. In the early 1800s, Lewis and Clark explored the territory west of the Mississippi. No one knew what they would find. As they traveled, they made maps. They wrote in their journals. They described miles and miles of beautiful land with tall trees, good soil, and rushing rivers. Okay, so I'm not sure what the word territory means. That's an unfamiliar word to me. So for me, that's a clunk, an obstacle to my comprehension. So I'm going to write the word territory up here on the board. And now step 1 in the vocabulary strategy is to look for context clues. So I'm going to read the words, phrases, and sentences around the word territory to see if I can find any context clues that will help me understand what territory means. So in the 5th sentence here, I think I may have found a synonym for territory. A synonym, remember, is something that means the same thing. It says miles and miles of beautiful land. So territory might have something to do with land. Step 2 in the strategy is to break the word into parts, such as your base word and your prefix or a suffix, but I don't see any prefixes or suffixes, so I'm just going to move on to step 3. In step 3, it says to use context clues from step 1 to guess the meaning of the word. So my guess, because it says miles and miles, is that territory might be a big area of land. So now step 4, the last part, is to try out my meaning in the original sentence to see if it makes sense in context. So I'm going to substitute big area of land for the word territory. So here goes. Lewis and Clark explored the big area of land west of the Mississippi. That makes sense. So now I'm going to write big area of land under territory as my meaning for that. Okay, so we've seen how to use click and clunk to help us with meaning, and now I'm going to model how to use get the gist to identify the most important ideas while we're reading. Good readers do this, just like we did when we learned how to use the paragraph shrinking strategy to help us think about the most important ideas in a paragraph and then shrink that information into a one-sentence main idea statement. In CSR, they call this process get the gist. So I'm going to use the steps in the paragraph shrinking strategy to help me get the gist of the first paragraph. So after we've reread the paragraph, so now first step is I'm going to identify who or what the paragraph is mostly about. So I think the main who in this paragraph is Lewis and Clark, because that's who they talk about the most. Next, I'm going to identify the most important information about the who or what, in this case, the who. I think the most important information about that Lewis and Clark is that they explored the territory west of the Mississippi and they described it in maps and journals. Now I have to shrink this information to a really good main idea statement of 10 words or less. That's important. You don't want it to be 15 or 20 words. That's not shrinking it enough. 10 words or less is your goal when you're doing the shrinking strategy. Okay, so here's my main idea statement, my getting the gist of the paragraph. Lewis and Clark were the first to explore the territory west of the Mississippi. Does that fit our 10 words? It does. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to write that up here. And now we're going to read the second paragraph of The Way West. News about the wonders of the West spread. People began to dream about a new life in a new land. And before long, they began traveling west on the Oregon Trail. At first, there were only a few adventurers. In 1843, 200 families crossed the Oregon Trail. Then, in 1848, gold was discovered in California. Soon after, thousands of people began heading west, hoping to make their dreams come true. Everything is clicking for me in that paragraph. I didn't have any clunks there. So now I'm going to get the gist of this paragraph. Again, the main who or what the paragraph is about. And I think in this case, the main who in this paragraph is just people, because it talks about people. I think the most important information about people in this paragraph is that they traveled west on the Oregon Trail in the hopes of making their dream come true. So here's my main idea statement. People traveled west on the Oregon Trail hoping to make their dreams come true. All right, so I have to check. Did I shrink it to 10 words? No, looks like I have 14. So I'm going to have to shrink it some more. So now here's what I think. People traveled west hoping to make their dreams come true. There, that's 10 words. That is the gist of this paragraph. So as we read on, we can read Packing for the Journey. That next big heading down there, so go ahead and follow along with me. Traveling west was not easy. The Oregon Trail was thousands of miles long and took between 4 and 6 months to cross. Pioneers had to pack everything they would need in a covered wagon that was not much bigger than a double bed. Once food, tools, and supplies for the journey were packed, the wagon was nearly full. As a result, there was no room left for personal belongings. But the pioneers left behind more than the comforts of home and their special treasures. They said goodbye to family and friends they never expected to see again. All right, so I did find a clunk in this passage. I don't know what the word belongings mean. So we're going to write belongings up here. So if you remember, step 1 of the vocabulary strategy is to look for context clues. The word personal in the same sentence might be a context clue. Belongings could be special personal things. Okay, so step 2 is to look for word parts. I do see 2 word parts in belongings. Belong and ings. Ings is our ending that we added to the word. So the root word of belonging is belong. If something belongs to you, it means you own it. All right, so now step 3 is to guess the meaning. So my guess, based on what we've already learned, is that belongings might be things that a person owns. Okay, so step 4, try to make meaning out of the original sentence by putting your own definition back into it. So I'm going to substitute what each person owned for belongings. As a result, there was no room left for what each person owned. That makes sense? I think it does. Okay, so we're going to write what each person owned as our definition here on the board. All right, so now we have to get the gist of this paragraph, the main who or what the paragraph is about. So the main who or what in this paragraph is what the pioneers could take, because that's what we're talking about, this kind of things that they could take with them on their journey. I think the most important information was that they could only take food, tools, and supplies, necessary things, because the wagons were really small. So here's my main idea sentence. The pioneers could only fit necessary things in the wagon. 10 words or less? All right, we're good. All right, great job so far. I know, this is getting kind of long and boring, but you guys are doing great. I really appreciate you listening so well. Okay, so now we're ready for the last part of our strategy, the wrap-up section, the part that we do after we read. So remember, This is what happens after we read the whole selection. You can't wrap up till you've read everything. Okay, so there's 2 parts to wrap up: asking and answering questions and reviewing what we have learned. So the first part of the strategy is to ask yourself questions, and not just any questions, but the kind of questions that you think I would ask you, the kind of questions you think a teacher would ask you. So I am going to show you what I mean by coming up with questions about what we just read. So focusing here on my main idea statements or my gists, I will begin each of my questions with either who, what, when, where, why, or how. I'm also going to remember the types of questions we learned about in the question-answer relationship strategy. Remember the right there, think and share, and author and me questions. Okay, so here's some of the questions that I came up with. Who explored the territory west of the Mississippi in the 1800s? What did the pioneers leave behind? And why do you think people were willing to pack up and head west? Now I'm going to answer each of these for you. I have to show you kind of the steps that we're going to take. So the first question, who explored the territory west of the Mississippi in the 1800s? The answer, Lewis and Clark. That answer is right there in the first sentence. Lewis and Clark explored the territory west of the Mississippi. All right, the next question, what did the pioneers leave behind? They left behind their belongings, their comforts of home, special treasures, and family and friends. You can find that down in the Packing for the Journey. It tells you all the things that the pioneers left behind. So that's one of those think and search. You kind of have to think a little bit to find the answer to that question. And then third, why do you think people were willing to pack up and head west? Answer that I came up with, they thought they would get rich. Why would they think they would get rich? Because of gold being discovered in California. Exactly. That's something kind of between the author and me that we were able to figure out as our answer. Okay, so for the final step of wrap-up, after we've answered our questions, we're going to review what we've learned by looking at the important information we've collected. Okay, so when reviewing, it's helpful to go back, look at our brainstorms. Remember our brainstorms we wrote way back here? And our predictions that we made during the preview step, and now we're either going to confirm them or revise them. Okay, so both of my brainstorms and predictions were confirmed in the text. Remember, I predicted I would learn about what the journey was like, specifically how and what they packed. I learned through reading that the journey was long and that they could only take essential items with them that would fit into the wagon. I also learned additional information, so I'm going to mark that down in my review. I learned that people knew about the West because of Lewis and Clark, so we're going to mark that down here, and that the discovery of gold in California is what prompted thousands of pioneers to cross the Oregon Trail in wagons in search of a new life. The trail was thousands of miles long and took many months to cross. Pioneers could only bring items with them that were necessary for survival. So those are all things that I was able to learn during my reading. Okay, so that's basically what I would do for my first day lesson. That's a lot to go over in one day, just to get the kids familiar or just, an introduction to the strategy. So the next day or the day after, depending upon how my Lit Block worked, we would do the guided practice, where in this case, same situation, I'm going to display the strategy chart. And then this time, we will work together. I will prompt the students in answering what questions we have in each section, what each of the sections entails, and kind of help them through this process. So we're going to go through that quickly now to the guided practice section. All right, today class, we are going to continue working with that CSR strategy that we were introduced to yesterday. And